Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. Today we will be looking at organizational change and the way we talk about it. So, what if organizational change didn't fail because people resist, but it failed because leaders stop listening and stop communicating when they hear hesitation? Hold that thought. Today's guest, Jeff Wetherhold, believes the way we talk about change is more important than how we plan it. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Susie, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to speaking with you today.
Likewise, it's an absolute pleasure. Jeff, you are the founder of MI for Health, so a consultancy grounded in this belief that better outcomes start with better conversations. And you have over 20 years experience in working with leadership and teams in mission-driven organizations on this very topic. And you actually blend behavioral science, change management, and also communication skills to help teams get there, to move from something disconnected to something more aligned. And within that, you also pioneer adapting motivational interviewing, which we'll come to, but a method originally from clinical psychology.
Mhm.
And you've taken it into boardrooms, leadership teams around the world to change the conversation on how to create sustainable change. And I want to start there, actually, Jeff. Can we go back to the way people talk about change? And can
Sure.
you tell us more about why the conversations about change need to change?
Sure. Um, in most organizations, unfortunately, I find that conversations about change are an afterthought
Hmm,
at best. We
interesting.
approach change, and we've been taught to approach change as if the right information and the
Hmm,
right plan are going to help others decide to change,
hmm,
as if we can conference room our way through it. And we know, based
hmm.
on the evidence from organizational change, that is not the case. 88% of organizational change efforts fail to produce any lasting results.
Mm,
And when we ask frontline staff and managers and supervisors what's missing,
mm,
what they need, they tell us. They don't say better frameworks or better models. They
mm.
don't talk about clearer measurement or evaluation. Now, I don't want to diminish the importance of these
Of
things. I
course.
am trained in
Mm,
them. They
mm.
are essential parts of change.
Yeah.
They talk about skills for communicating with one another and for engaging with those who are skeptical of change or disengaged from
Mm,
change, perhaps. And those are not things that we're accustomed to training leaders and managers and teams in. We need to be. And I
mm.
think the evidence makes it very clear that without skill in those areas, organizational change is going to continue to be a largely unsuccessful enterprise.
And it's interesting though, isn't it, Jeff? Because I hear what you say. I'm nodding. For those of you listening, I'm nodding because it sounds familiar and it's what I've heard, but yet we don't do it, do we? So, as a leader, I can be stood there thinking, yes, yes, you're right. I need to talk about change. You don't want to see the roadmap. You don't want to, but we don't do that. And then we label it resistance to change. So, I think it's really interesting. We were talking before the show, and you were saying that a lot of leaders and organizations misread people's hesitation as resistance. So, do you think that resistance to change as an example or an explanation is becoming an excuse for us not doing the work that is uncomfortable for us to do?
Mm. I do think it's easy for us to make excuses not to do this work.
Hmm.
It's easy to hear something conversational or relational and dismiss it as a
Hmm.
nice to have.
Hmm.
And yet, the costs of failed organizational change are immense.
Yeah,
A
huge.
mid-sized organization with 200 staff
Hmm.
that pursues a one-year organizational change project that's not successful can expect to lose a minimum of 1.5 to $2 million.
Yeah, huge.
That is not a nice to have.
No, no.
So I really try to shift people's thinking from, well, this is the right thing to do, to, yes, it's the right thing, but it's also essential for our bottom line. When we think about people's attitudes toward change,
Hmm.
we often think about them as fixed,
Hmm.
for it or against it. You're with us or you're not.
Yeah.
One of the core tenets of motivational interviewing that I think can be really helpful here is to recognize that we are all ambivalent about change. We have reasons that we're willing to consider it,
Mm,
We have reasons that we're inclined not to consider it.
mm,
And those reasons coexist over time. They're in flux. The balance of those reasons shifts.
mm,
So that takes the burden off of us as leaders and managers to convince everyone you have to let go of all of your reasons not to change and accept all of my reasons to change. That's wholly unrealistic and wholly unnecessary,
mm,
thankfully.
mm.
Rather, we can tweak that balance. And we can teach people how, in a very intentional way, to tweak the balance of people's existing motivations to help more of them move toward change. You also mentioned a word that I encounter a lot, which is resistance.
Resistance. Yeah.
I dislike this word, and I
Mm,
have to acknowledge that as a field, change management practitioners are responsible for popularizing this word. It gets used all of the time,
mm,
and I think it does a lot of harm. So when we recognize that we don't have fixed attitudes toward
mm,
change, we can also recognize that there are a lot of reasons that people choose not to change or hesitate to
mm,
change. And they aren't all due to resistance. So if somebody doesn't understand why a change is happening, they're not resistant.
mm.
If I've taught them how to do something but not resourced them to do it in their job, if their boss has told them, oh, this change management consultant's going to go away in a few months, don't worry about it, just wait for it to pass,
Yeah.
which has happened to
Yeah,
me
of course.
multiple times,
Sounds very
they're not
familiar.
resistant. If they've never been trained, they're not resistant.
No, they're just
So
unequipped.
that's exactly right. So this term resistance attributes intention
Mm,
to something that is often not intentional. When we use terms like change resistant or averse, we
mm,
attribute that intention to someone's decision whether or not it's fair.
mm,
We also flatten individuals by generalizing their attitudes toward one change to their attitudes toward all change.
mm.
And we know that people have very different attitudes toward different changes.
Yeah.
And also, people don't like to be called resistant.
No, of course.
It's a great way to make people resistant.
It's to call
It
them resistant.
communicates, what's that?
It's to call them resistant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's self-fulfilling. It communicates very low expectations, which likely isn't going to help your cause if you're
Mm,
trying to move change forward. So
mm,
I encourage people to talk about these as different attitudes toward change. And often, even if in the back of my head I think this person may be willfully resistant to this, I'm surprised by what I learn when I sit down and have an open-minded conversation. I think leaders will be as well.
mm. So we're back to, and we listen in organizations often to fix or to give our opinion as opposed to listening to understand. And
Mhm.
if, this is what I call the messy middle of change, it's that space between wanting or not wanting to change, having an ambivalence or not feeling equipped enough, or just thinking, just having a process about what's in it for me and what I think of what's in it for me. And in the same way that leaders sometimes stop listening when you hesitate, I think they often mistake silence for resistance or defiance in inverted commas.
Mm,
And I think it's just you get boxed into the buzzwords, like you say, change, resistance to change, the skeptics, they don't want to do it. They're being obstructive. They're naysayers or not. So I really love your reframe on resistance to change, and it brings me directly to the motivational interviewing discussion,
mhm.
which for me uses lots of different lenses to look at the different facets of change, which I think is what is fascinating about it. Can you tell us a little bit more, Jeff, about, for our listeners, maybe hearing for the first time about motivational interviewing, what does it bring to the change landscape?
Sure. So motivational interviewing is an approach that was developed about 45 years ago by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick. And
Mm,
it was designed to help professionals in mental health and recovery settings work with their clients.
mm,
It was designed for situations where they wanted to guide others toward change that was important to them, but that the professionals couldn't make for them. In the decade since it was developed, we have amassed a wide range of evidence for how effective MI or motivational interviewing can be across disciplines. We have 2,500 randomized control trials and counting,
Mm,
180,000 plus entries on Google Scholar, and we know that this is effective in fields as diverse as mental health, pastoral care, athletics coaching, criminal justice, and
mm,
yeah, organizational change. Unfortunately, a lot of the ways in which we teach and talk about this are still geared toward those helping professionals, therapists,
mm,
counselors, psychiatrists that this was designed for.
mm,
So we do miss a lot of the leaders and managers and teams that could benefit immensely from this. Our reach has not kept pace with
mm,
the evidence.
mm,
So when I define MI for the audiences that I work with, I say it's a set of conversational tools and skills for helping people move toward change that you can't make for them.
mm. I like the last bit.
Who can't relate to that?
Yeah, totally.
Right? Who hasn't been in a situation professionally, likely
Mm,
today, if you
mm.
reflect on it,
Yeah.
where you wanted someone to change, but you couldn't compel them to
Mm,
change? What are you left to do? So MI provides us with a very concrete set of tools and skills and an approach for how we have these conversations. And one of the things that I love dearly about it is that I don't have to stop at the level of platitudes. I don't just
mm,
have to reframe how people think about these issues. I can teach them at a very granular level how to listen differently,
mm-hmm.
how to speak differently, and help them build their belief in different modes of communication from those practices. So they don't have to defer gratification,
Mm,
which I think is really important in working with adult learners. We know
yeah.
we want to build on skills and small steps whenever we can and interleave those. MI provides us with those really clear, actionable things that you can leave and start doing today to have better conversations about change.
Mm. And so if I am, let's say, a team lead listening right now,
Mhm.
what would be one MI inspired micro skill that I could use tomorrow, Jeff, to have a better change conversation?
We can learn to listen for what we talk about as change and sustained talk. And by that, I mean change talk is someone's own language
Mm-hmm.
for change in support of change, and sustained talk is their own language against change. We talked earlier about this conception of ambivalence.
Mm,
We all have both reasons to change and reasons not to change.
mm,
We voice those as change and sustained talk. And often we'll hear these not just in the same conversation, but in the same sentence. I should make this a priority, but I don't see that happening.
mm,
When you learn to listen for these things, you learn to see the raw ingredients for a different kind of
mm,
conversation. These are the essential elements that we're going to be working with. So, the first skill that I will teach any leader or manager on MI is how to listen for both change and sustained talk. We can practice picking those out of examples that are both easy and
mm,
hard, because
mm,
often it can get kind of buried. But when we learn to listen for those, when we learn to tune into those in a conversation, all of a sudden we realize there's material there to work with that we haven't been noticing. And that material is what enables all of the skills for speaking to
mm,
change, for
mm,
changing the way in which you offer something back to that individual
mm,
to be effective. But we have to start with listening. We have to
mm,
start with understanding there's always change talk, there's always sustained talk, and we can get better at listening for those.
mm. And it sounds so simple, doesn't it, listening? But it's actually quite a deep-rooted skill, isn't it, to actually listen, to be present and
Mhm.
hear different levels of change talk. Let's put it that way.
It benefits from practice.
Yeah.
Um, Many of the skills that I teach to leaders and teams, they're easy things to smile and nod to.
Hmm.
They're easy things to hear in a presentation and say, yeah, we probably do that. But then when we go to use those, when we go to practice them, realize that the way in which we have these conversations is very much out of step with what
Mm,
can be helpful. And that for me is an important step. We can't just tell people what the right thing to do is.
mm,
We have to help them
mm,
make it part of their daily work
mm.
in order to see the benefits that come from this.
And what I like about that is that we're meeting people where they are with their
Hmm.
own language, and whatever they feel or wherever they are, in according with the change, whether they want it, whether they don't want it, whether they're unsure. And it brings me back to models.
Mm.
And it's about the model that works for them, isn't it? Because there are so many models. So how do you go about? I know you're certified in some of the models, Pro Sky, for example, and others, and there
Mhm.
are various models around change. But how do you manage that, Jeff, in terms of getting people to understand that it's a model,
Mhm.
not something that you copy and paste, one size fits all?
Yeah. We have ample evidence what happens when we pursue organizational change based on frameworks and models alone. When we treat
Mm,
this as a planning activity and not a relational activity, it's roundly unsuccessful.
mm,
It alienates staff, it costs us staff, it is unsustainably expensive. That does not make models and frameworks bad. They're
mm,
necessary parts of change.
mm,
There's a very well-known quote by a statistician named George R. Box, who was one of the founders of continuous improvement.
mm.
All models are wrong, some are useful. Your
A
models are
summary,
useful.
yeah.
Sometimes I'll have a client come to me and say, are we using the right model? And my question back to them is, are you using it consistently? Because if it's a well-established model and you're using it consistently, you're getting plenty out of it.
Mm,
You're getting something back from it. I've
mm,
never been part of a change that didn't work out and looked back and thought, you know, if they would have used this model instead of that one, probably would have worked.
mm,
That's not really the nature of the enterprise. But when we stop seeing models as the be all and end all of organizational change, what we realize is that those models need different ingredients. We need to feed different things into them.
mm,
And the way we do that is by having different kinds of conversations with one another and with our teams. That is what enables us to learn what we didn't know we had to learn,
mm,
to feed that in to whatever model we're using, and to get a different result back. I
mm,
do find teams overinvest in
mm,
models and frameworks and plans upfront
mm,
without having that knowledge. And it becomes hard once you've invested so heavily in those to disinvest and take a step back. I don't want to discourage teams from having strong models and frameworks, but I think for any of the models and frameworks that are out there, you need different ways of relating to one another and learning from your team in order to make them more successful. I think the evidence makes it very clear that that's a gap
mm,
in change management.
mm. And do you come up against this expectation from clients that they've chosen a model,
Mhm.
you are certified in that model, so therefore everything will be fine. And if it if it doesn't work, it's your fault. How often do you
Yes.
meet that? Because I meet it so much.
Um, Most days, if not every day,
Okay.
would be my answer to that.
Mm.
Um, I think, first of all, I have to find ways to empathize with that leader.
Yeah.
If I am going to practice what I teach, then I need to find ways to empathize with them. They need a clear solution to organizational change that
Mm.
badly.
Mm. Mm.
And yet, models alone haven't gotten them there. So when I help people see their way clearly to, the problem isn't that you have the wrong model or you've been doing it wrong. The problem is that you have half of the tools at best that you need to make organizational change successful.
Mm.
And you've been taught that that's enough. And it's not. Whatever
Mm.
your model is, however well you're using it, it is necessary and insufficient to
Mm.
get to change. You're going to need to have different ways of speaking to one another. You're going to need to have different ways of learning in order to make that initiative successful. So taking the weight off of models and frameworks for me is really important
Mm.
and helping people realize that these are core skills.
Mm.
How we talk to one another about change, and they're not going anywhere. I don't talk to leaders who say their organization is changing less than it
No,
was 5 years ago.
no, clearly. Yeah. Mm. And I think, building the relational infrastructure in any team is really important, but even more so in uncertainty, which is essentially where we are today, all of us, in
Mhm.
most workplaces. And it brings me to another buzzword, Jeff, change fatigue. Okay.
Mhm.
So, do you think that change fatigue is a real thing?
Mhm.
And if yes, is it driven by this over dependence on models?
I do think that change fatigue is a real thing.
Hmm.
There is a lot of evidence out there to support it. And I think that it is in large part driven by the low success rate that we have in
Hmm.
organizational change.
Hmm.
So we know that change is increasing in organizations. 85% of executives and project managers report a rise in the number of change management projects they have. We know that most employees expect it to be constant,
Mm.
78% in the last survey I read. And they also see it as a necessary part of work, right? Sometimes we
Yeah.
have this perception that people just wish change wouldn't happen or they don't think it's necessary. By and large, that is not true. 70% of employees recognize that transformation is important to remain competitive.
Yeah.
So we
Especially
know that,
today.
yeah, we know that this is a bigger and bigger part of work. And yet we know that 75% of employees who've been through a disruptive change report that they're burnout.
Mm.
We know that employees are 42% more likely to leave an organization due to failed organizational change. And we know that when they are fatigued, 93% of them cite their employer backtracking on at least one change as a cause for that fatigue. So it's not mysterious to me. I shouldn't be
Mm.
mysterious to anyone that a big part of this phenomena of change fatigue is how unsuccessful change often is and how often we have to revisit change. One of the most important things that we could do to address change fatigue is to put better practices in place to manage change so that we don't have to repeat
Mm.
that cycle over and over again.
Mm. And it's important though, isn't it, the word you just used, cycle. So
Mm,
it's not a plan, is it? It's a cycle. And particularly today, an iterative cycle. And I'm also hearing, Jeff, from you that it's not a plan or a project, it's a relational activity
mhm,
and contributes to building the social tissue of an organization.
mhm,
But most of us have been trained to see it as a process flow, templates, roadmaps, some mapping of stakeholders, if we want to
mhm,
talk about relational stuff. Um, but what you're saying is it's actually about relationships. So
mhm,
how does that play out when you're working with clients?
mhm.
How readily do they step into that discussion of, yes, you're right, Jeff. It's probably about relationship.
I have never had a client say that to me. Yes, you're
Okay.
right, Jeff. It's probably about relationships. And honestly, that flies in the face of everything we know about how people
Mm,
adopt change,
mm,
right? I wouldn't teach a leader to expect that from their staff, and I don't expect that
yeah,
from a leader.
yeah.
What I don't want people to hear is that plans and process maps and stakeholder mapping are things like that aren't important. They
Mm,
are important,
mm,
but they're not going to be effective without the inputs that you get from those conversations. Right? You're not going to get the value that you need to get from those things
mm,
without those inputs. And I think
mm,
it's really important that we take the weight off those activities.
yeah.
I try very hard to make a case up front for how much this is already costing them. I think the
Mm,
easiest um, sort of point of skepticism for why someone should adopt this work is, I don't have time for this. And it's true, they don't have time for it. And
mm,
typically, the reason they don't have time for it is that they've been participating in a tremendously inefficient change process to begin with.
yeah,
The
yeah.
solution is not to run faster on the hamster wheel, it's to
Mm,
step off the wheel
mm,
and to approach this differently.
mm,
So I need to be able to position this conversational or relational piece of change as the solution to a problem that they're feeling. The problem that they're feeling is they're expecting things from those models and process flows and frameworks they're not going to get. It's an
Mm.
unrealistic expectation, but it's not one that they developed on their own typically. It's
Clearly.
what they've been taught.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
as change management practitioners are guilty of
Absolutely.
teaching people that these things are sufficient.
Mm.
And I don't think that that happens for the noblest of reasons.
Yeah.
I do think that it takes advantage of people's anxiety
Mm.
about change in a very real way
Mm.
and leads them to a place where they're pursuing work out of the best interest for the consultants that are bringing them partial solutions rather than out of the best interest for their organizations.
Mm. And of course, if they're craving certainty, frameworks and tangible models will make it feel less scary, of course.
Yes, they will
Mm.
offer you a temporary sense of
Mm.
certainty.
Mm. I like this. You're right, a
It will,
temporary sense of certainty. Yeah.
yeah, it will
Mm.
fade.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't talk about all this change and transformation and almost the reinvention cycle in today's world without asking you about AI, Jeff.
Hmm.
How do you see the onset of generative AI and its effect on transformation projects, but also particularly the relational aspect?
Mhm. I think there's 2 points I would call out. The first one is I think it's very clear that AI is transforming a
Mm,
lot of aspects,
mm,
a lot of workplaces very quickly.
mm,
And it's tempting to look at that impact and to then go straight to a place where we assume that AI is immune to the laws of change adoption, that it won't follow the same trajectory as every other idea or new tool that we've introduced to an organization.
mm.
Now, I'm old enough to remember when people talked about the internet this way,
Me too.
and I haven't let go of that. And
Mm,
that's not to say that the internet didn't change the way that we work together. Of course it
mm,
did.
mm,
But it was not immune to the laws of how people adopt change, and AI isn't either.
mm,
So the hard part of AI, in my experience, is not the technology, and that's not something I'm expert in, so I'm not going to speak to it.
mm,
It's getting people to adopt it and use it. And that is a highly relational pursuit. I also, the second point I'll make on that is that I encounter people frequently enough for this to be a trend who think that AI is going to make this problem go away,
oh yeah.
that they won't have to talk to people. They won't
Mm,
have to learn how to help other people change. AI will do that for them. And if my experience is any indicator, AI is making people worse
yes.
at communicating with one another. It's making more people disconnected from those conversations. It's taking attention away from them. So far from it being a solution to this problem, I actually see AI exacerbating it.
Mm,
Not, and I don't think that's inevitable. I think that's a byproduct of the outsized weight that we put on AI or expectation that we put on AI to solve
mm,
conversational and relational problems for us that I don't believe it will help us solve. When we find solutions, are there ways in which it can help us scale them?
mm.
Absolutely. But that's a very different question, which I think most change management practitioners will be well attuned to,
Yeah.
than helping us develop a solution. And we're nowhere near there yet. So people still need to adopt.
Mm,
We're still going to have messy conversations with them to understand what helps them do that and what prevents them from doing that. And in my experience, AI has not made those go away, and I don't believe it will make them go
mm,
away.
mm. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it can automate some of that, but it could also augment some of that.
Mhm.
And I think, what if it could augment the way I communicate on change and make it even more relational? But
Sure.
to have time to do that, of course, I need to step back from everything that's going on in my daily life. And if I look at how much I've got going on a change project and that isn't working,
Hmm.
then I don't have time to do that. So the default will be transactional, won't it?
Yeah, that can often happen.
Mm,
I don't want to dismiss the value of AI, even to work in motivational interviewing. There are validated tools
Mm,
for assessing
mm,
a practitioner's fidelity to motivational interviewing that are out there, and great AI solutions that are being developed for how we use those tools to give people feedback in real time. How are
mm,
you doing in
mm,
terms of applying what we know is effective in motivational interviewing in this setting?
mm.
It's a tremendous advancement and a tremendous benefit, but it's very different from teaching someone how to have that conversation well in the first place.
Yeah, and how to use human connection and empathy, which is not AI's remit today, is it? So, Jeff, time is running, but if you had to leave our listeners with one message or one sentence, what is the core truth for you about change conversations?
That the way we speak to one another about change matters,
Mm,
that it is not a nice to have. The vast majority of organizational change efforts fail. Those failures are incredibly expensive, and avoiding them requires conversational and relational skills that most leaders and teams have never been taught.
mm,
This
mm,
work matters, and the way out of what for many organizations is a repetitive process of repeating attempts at organizational change is not to double down on the same approaches. It's to learn skills that no one has likely ever tried to teach you to help you relate to the people around you differently than you're able to right now.
mm. Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with that idea of how do I have conversations, and it's more about what I don't know than what I do know in
Mm,
the area of team dynamics and how I communicate with others. Jeff, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and your experience. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
sure. So you can find me at jeffwetherhold.com or miforhealth.com. I'm on LinkedIn at Jeff Wetherhold, and I would love to connect with any listeners out there who hear this and think, not so sure about that. There's something interesting there, but I'm not really sure if it applies to my situation. I learn as much from conversations with people who are interested in this work as they learn from me. So if this has been food for thought, if you're walking away from this wondering whether or not some of this may be helpful to you, I welcome the chance to speak further.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll put all those links in the show notes so that people can get to you quickly. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you, Susie.